Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom and welcome to today's Daf Yomi Niddah Daf Mem Zayin. We will begin on Daf Memvav Amud Beis towards the bottom. Hachinami mistavra. Now the halacha is that a katan or a ktana, within a year of becoming gdolim, in the case of a katan, he's already 12 years old. That is called the muflah hasamoch leish. Since he's on the verge, on the threshold of becoming a gadol, he has the koyach to make a neder or to be magdish something. There was machlekes amiroim in the Gemara whether this is a din de'iraisa, it is min ha'torah, or merely a din de'rabbanan. The Gemara asks, how can you say that this is only min de'rabbanan? So how then does Rabbi Yosi say in the Mishnah that a katan who is a muflah samach leish can be mafresh truma? If his ability to do so is merely de'rabbanan, how could he be mafresh truma, which is a chiyuv de'iraisa? The Gemara answered that Rabbi Yosi will hold that truma bizman hazeh, nowadays b'shas galus, is only a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. Therefore, a katan who has the power to be mafresh d'Rabbanan can be mafresh this type of truma. The Gemara is going to bring a raya that Rabbi Yosi holds that truma bizman hazeh is d'Rabbanan from a brisa. Hachinami mistavra, the sanya, it says in the brisa, isa, a dough of chulin, shenidma, meaning that a little bit of truma got mixed into it. Oishin is chamza, bis'or shel truma, a leavening agent of truma got mixed into the dough and was machametzit, made it, fermented it. So now the status of the isa is min ha'torah, it's still mutter, because Rashi explains to us that min ha'torah chad b'trei batal. Even if there's only a majority of heter over the iser, that already is mevatel the iser. However, midrabanan, they required 100 times more heter than iser, and therefore in this case it is aser to eat for a non-kohen mid-rabbanan, but only mid-rabbanan and not mid-raisa. So what is the halacha of this isa? Chayeves bechala ve'ena nefselas b'tful yom. Regarding the chiv chala, it is still considered like chulin. Truma does not require afrashas chala, but this isa does not have the status of truma, because min ha'torah it is still chulin. And regarding the chiv chala, which is a chiv min ha'torah, we have to consider it as ordinary chulin. So it is chayev b'chala ve'ena nefselas b'tful yom. Now, tful yom means somebody who is toivel and still needs hair of shemesh. He hasn't completed his tahara until the end of the day, until nightfall. So if he comes into contact with truma, he parcels it. But chulin does not become nifsal through a tful yom. And so to this isa, this dough is considered like chulin regarding tful yom and does not become pasul. Divei Rab Meir, Rab Yehuda, Rab Yosi, Rab Shimon, poitr min ha'chala. They hold that this isa is pater from chala. It is exempt. Why? Because they will hold that chala bizman hazeh is rabbanon, and therefore an isa which has a status of truma midrabbanon, since there was a little bit of truma mixed into it, therefore regarding a chiv d'rabbanon we consider it as if it's truma and is pater from the chiv chala, which is also midrabbanon. Savrua, the Bnei Yeshiva thought man da amat truma da'iraisa chala da'iraisa. The shita, the opinion that holds that truma is daraisa, he will also hold that chala is daraisa bizman hazeh. However, man da'ama truma d'rabbanan, the shita that will hold that nowadays the chiv truma is just a chiv d'rabbanan, so too chala d'rabbanan, meaning we're equating both chiyuvim. We're equating with b'medama the chiv chala with the chiv truma, and if we find a machlekes regarding chiv chala bizman hazeh, that according to Rabbi Yosi the chiv chala b'zman hazeh is just midrabanan, so too regarding the chiv truma b'zman hazeh, that nowadays it is merely a chiv d'rabbanan, and that supports our pshat. We mentioned earlier that Rabbi Yosi will hold that the chiv truma b'zman hazeh is midrabanan. So the Gemara, I amar spishleim kasav Rabbi Yosi chala b'zman hazeh d'rabbanan. So if you hold that Rabbi Yosi will hold that chala b'zman hazeh d'rabbanan, asi demur d'rabbanan umafka chala d'rabbanan, meaning that you must establish that Rabbi Yosi will hold that the chiv chala b'zman hazeh is d'rabbanan. Since he holds a chala nowadays is d'rabbanan, therefore asi dimur d'rabbanan, the halacha of meduma, which is a rabbanan dikadin, umafka chala d'rabbanan, it will undo upater the chiv chala, which is also midrabbanan. Meaning we're considering it truma midrabbanan, therefore it is pater from chala, which is also a chiv d'rabbanan. Eli Yamras Chala Dairaisa, but if Rabbi Yosi were to hold that Chiv Chala Bizman Hazeh is Dairaisa, how would that work? Asi Dimur D'Rabbanan, can then the Din Meduma, which is merely D'Rabbanan, Mafka Chala Dairaisa, will that come and exempt this Isa from Chiv Chala, which is Dairaisa? So in conclusion, you must establish that Rabbi Yosi will hold that Chiv Chala and Chiv Truma, by the same token, Bizman Hazeh is only a Chiv D'Rabbanan. So the Gemara, Vidilma, perhaps you can say fakir, shade the opposite. Kasavra Abiyasi Truma Bizman Hazeh D'Oraisa Chal D'Rabbanan. Meaning, why are you equating? Why are you being medamed that just like he holds a chiv chala is the Rabbanan, so to chiv truma is the Rabbanan? Perhaps you can make a distinction that chiv chala Bizman Hazeh is taka is really midrabanan. However, he holds that truma Bizman Hazeh is the Raisa. Ukada Hader Rav Huna B'Der Shua, just like Rav Huna B'Der Shua replied in the Beis Medrash. The Amar Rav Huna B'Der Rav Yeshua Ashkechsinu l'Rabbanan d'Berab. I found the Talmidim in the Beis Medrash. The Yasif V'Karmer, they were sitting and saying, Afilu l'man da'amar truma b'zman hazeh d'Rabbanan. They were saying a chiddush that even the shita that holds truma b'zman hazeh d'Rabbanan, still and all chala d'Oraisa. They will hold that chiv chala b'zman hazeh can be b'nat Torah. Why is that? What was their raya? Sharei sheva shekavshu v'sheva shechilku neschayvu b'chalav lo neschayvu b'maiser. We know that when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, for the first 7 years they conquered. Next 7 years they split up the various areas of Eretz Yisrael amongst the Shvatim. During those 14 years there was no chiyuv maiser. But however, regarding chala, as soon as they came into Eretz Yisrael, immediately they were chayiv b'chala. So we see it's not necessarily hinging one on the other. We can have a chiyuv chala without a chiyuv maiser. So too, in our case, they hold, the Rabbanan V'Rav held, that even the Shita, the Manda'amar that holds Truma B'Zman Hazeh is the Rabbanan, but Chiv Chala can still remain a Chiv D'Oraisa. And I responded to them just the opposite. Afilu l'man da'amar Truma B'Zman Hazeh D'Oraisa, even the Shita that holds Truma B'Zman Hazeh is D'Oraisa, Chala will be the Rabbanan. Meaning, he flipped the whole thing around. Meaning that the Chiv Truma is more powerful, is more lasting than the Chiv Chala. Why is that? The Sanya, we learned in the Brayse, it says in the Pasuk, as soon as you enter Eretz Yisrael, you be Chayiv B'Chala. As soon as the Meraglim came into Eretz Yisrael, that already is Mechayiv the Yidden with the Chiv of Chala. Talmud lo'ima b'vayachem, b'vias kulchem amarti, v'loi b'vias miktaschem. We need that everybody, all the Yidden together should come into Eretz Yisrael, and not just partially. Ezra, and we know that after the Churban Bayis Rishon, when the Yidden came back to Eretz Yisrael, and Ezra brought them up to Eretz Yisrael, not everybody came up to Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, if during the Binyan Habayis Sheni, during the second era, the second return to Eretz Yisrael, it wasn't a bias kulchem, only partially, therefore there's no chiv chala. Meaning from the beginning of the second bias, there was no chiv chala min ha-Torah. Although certainly there was a chiv truma, because by truma we don't find this explicit mention of Torah that we need bias kulchem, only regarding chiv chala. So the conclusion of Rav Huna B'Der Shua to them was that just the opposite. Don't tell me that chiv chala is more everlasting, more powerful, so to speak, than chiv truma. Even the shita that holds truma b'zman hazeh rabban chala will still be d'oraisa. It's just the opposite. Even the shita that holds that truma b'zman hazeh is d'oraisa, regarding chala will still be only a chiv d'rabanan. So therefore, getting back to our brayso, although Rabbi Yossi says that chiv chala b'zman hazeh is d'rabanan, it's not necessarily so that he will hold the same regarding truma. Perhaps the chiv truma b'zman hazeh will remain a chiv d'oraisa, and therefore we have no proof to base our psharam that Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion of truma b'zman hazeh is d'rabanan, and we can't really bring a riot to our teretz on the previous kasha. So in conclusion, there is a machlekes if truma b'zman hazeh is d'rabanan. We have a machlekes if chala b'zman hazeh is d'rabanan. And the conclusion of the Gemara is not necessarily are they totally high by not necessarily can we equate both things to each other. Zok the Mishnah Vayt. Mashal mashlu chacham be'isha. Chacham made a mashal regarding the stages of the development of a woman. Paga, boichel, v'tzemel. Paga means she's a bud, she's very young, she's a ktana. Boichel means she's partially developed. V'tzemel is fully developed. Paga, when she's a state of a paga of a bud, oida tinoikes, she is merely a ktana. Boichel, if she's a step further, she's partially developed. Elu yimei nu'urea, these are considered the yimei nu'urim, and she's considered a gdoila. Bezu, in both stages, whether she's a ktana or a nara. Amru, Chazal said that Avia Zakai, Avia, the father, is entitled b'mitziyasav. So if she finds something, it belongs to the father. B'masiyadeh, if she earns something, it goes to the father. And the third thing is ba'afaras and if she's to make a neder, the father could be made for the neder. He can annul and void the neder that she made. However, Tzemel, when she's at the third state, which is at Tzemel fully grown, she's a Beigeres, Kivan Shebagra, once she developed to that point, Shuv Ein Lavia Rishuspa, he has no Rishus, he has no authority over her, he has no Schusim of Metzia, of Masiyadayim, and Afaras Nedarim. Now, how do we know which state she's holding by? Ezus Yumaneh. What are the simanim, the signs of development? Now, the Gemara is referring to signs regarding the dadim of an isha, the breast of an isha. Rabbi Yisrael Glili Aimer, what is the sign of a begeres, a third state of tzemel? When she develops a fold underneath the dad. Rabbi Kiva Aimer, when they're already hanging. That is a step further, that is more grown than the shita of Rabbi Yitzchak Lili. But Nazai Aimer, what is the shear of tzemel? When the top area of the dad blackens. Rabbi Yossi Aimer, Kadeshi Noisin Yada Loikitz. It is when he puts his finger on the tip of the dad, and he sinks in, and he waits a while until he returns to its former state. So we have 4 descriptions of the state of tzemel, whether it's Meshiyale Hakemet, which means a fold, or Meshiyatu, they're more grown, Meshiyashchir, when the top area blackens, or the mashal with the oikitz that sinks and rises. So the Gemara Paga Identity Naikis. We mentioned in the Mishnah that there are 3 stages: is Paga, when she's still a Ktana, undeveloped, Beichel, partially developed, and Tzemel, fully grown. How do we know? Where do we find these terms? Paga Identity Naikis, she's still very young. Tchitachsiv, Hate'ena, Chanta, Pageha. The fig tree has grown its buds. Beichel, Elu Yiman Urim. They're already at the state of Yiman Urim, more developed. Ketesnan, we've learned in the Mishnah, Hate'enim, what is the shear, what is the amount that a te'ena, that a fig needs to grow in order to be considered chayav v'maiser? Mishi yivchelu, when they've grown a little bit. V'amar Rav Barachana, Amar Rav Mishiyal ben Rashem, when the tips become white, and that is a simon of a partially grown fig and is chayav v'maiser. So we see here that paga relates to something which is merely a bud, but beichel is already a step further, it is already partially grown. If you want, I'll bring a Rai Mihocha from the pasuk Vatiktzar nafshi bahem. I will be impatient in them. V'gam nafshom b'chalabi, and they became disgusted in me. And the point of becoming of this disgust is because when something looms very big and great and overwhelming, a person can become disgusted in it. So we see that the lashon, the term b'chalab, is referring to something great, something grown, something large. Tzemel, what is the definition of the word tzemel? Where does that come from? It is a nutrikun, is like a combination of 2 words. Tzemel have the letters of yatzisam malaya, meaning they have emerged, she's fully grown. Ve'ezu simonea, what are the signs of a tzemel of a begeres? Rabbi Yosef Glili Oime Meshiyal hakemet. Amar Shmuel lo Meshiyal hakemet mamish. We're not speaking about there's actual fold. El kadesha tachsi yodel achareya. If she stretches her hand back, it appears as if there's some sort of fold here. Shmuel Badak Ba'amse. Shmuel wanted to clarify for himself the simanim that we mentioned in the Mishnah, and he checked with his Amma, a female slave. And because she was shamed, he gave her, he compensated her with 4 zuzim. Shmuel Tamei, Shmuel is going according to his shita. The Amar Shmuel Lo'ilam Be'em Ta'avoidu. You need to work. You may work with Avadim Lo'ilam. La'avoidu nasatim v'loi lebusha. You may work with them. You got to work them hard, but not to degrade them and embarrass them. Therefore, he needs to compensate her for the shame. Shmuel miyachad lahem. Consistent with this shita, Shmuel was miyachad his shvachos to Avadim, meaning he didn't degrade them. He wasn't mafkir them to any man, but he was miyachid, he designated them to certain people, and therefore he lessened their shame. Rav Nachman machav lehen, Rav Nachman would switch their partners, meaning he wasn't concerned with shaming his shvachis. Rav Sheshes went a step further. Masan la Rav, he gave him over to an Arab, but he told them, he warned them, V'amar lem izdarum Yisrael. He told the shvachis, don't get involved, keep away from the Yisrael, meaning by giving them to Aravim, this way he prevented them from tangling with Yidden and being machshil them. Rabbi Yosi says in the Mishnah that the shear of a tzemel, the most advanced state of development of a tzemel, which is a begeres, is if he puts his finger on the oikitz, it sinks and returns slowly to its former state. My oikitz, what is the oikitz? Amar Shmuel, oikitz shaldad, the tip of the dat. Tana Rabbanon, now the Gemara will add another 2 shitas regarding this description, this madrega of a tzemel. Eilu and Simonim Bagris. What are the Simonim of Bagris? Reb Lezer, Reb Tzadok, Omer Mashiach Kashkashu Adadim. When they grow very large, that they shake. Reb Yais Rechan Breika Omer Mashiach Sevrei Shachotim. When the top of the dad will blacken. Mashiach Sevrei Gemara. This state of black is kunila. It's an indication of a very, very old, of a very developed woman. You don't need that much development in order to be considered a begeres. Ela Maravashi, Meshiyavsel Rosh HaChotim. Not they will become black, but the Rosh HaChotim will get Yavsel, which is perforated, meaning you see the hole from where the milk flows out. So here we have another 2 shitas to add to the 4 shitas mentioned in the Mishnah for a total of 6 shitas of what is considered the simonim of a begeres. Rabbi Yosi Omer, Mishatakiv ha'atara. When the atara means the crown will surround it, and Rashi explains this is exactly the same description as Rabbi Yosi said in the Mishnah, that the finger will push the oikitz down and it will stay down and come back, and it's the same exact shita. Reb Shimon, one more shita, Mishnah Smayach HaKaf. This is a 7th shita, that the kaf, which is an area above the makam ha'erva, it is round like a kaf, and when she gets older, when the isha grows, this area flattens out. So when that happens, that is a simon of a begeres. There are 2 areas of simonim, and there are 3 levels of development of an isha regarding these 2 types of simonim. The simonim mentioned in the Mishnah regarding the dadim, that is called lamala. Now we know in addition to that, an isha, in order to be considered a gdela, needs to have shtei saris, needs to grow 2 hairs in the makam, certain makamis in the guf, and therefore the chachamim categorized it into 3 madregas, into 3 levels. Let's see inside. Pagum lamala v'yadua shalahiyavia shtei saris. If the isha lamala has no simonim of dadim, it is obvious that she has no saris lamata as well, meaning that it hinges one on the other. When there's no simonim lamala, that is a rai, that is a proof that there are no saris milamata, and she's still a full-fledged ketana. The next madreg, the next level is boichel milamala. If you see that it's already partially developing lamala, meaning by the dadim, yadua shevia shtei saris, that will be a proof, that's a confirmation that she already has grown the 2 saris milamata, and she's a full-fledged gedola. What is the final madrega? Semel milamala. If the dadim are fully grown, as we described the 6 shitas mentioned before, v'yadua shenismayach hakaf. In that case, we know that she went a step further, and the kaf is already flattened out. My kaf, what is the kaf? Amrafuna makam tafuach. There is an elevated place. Leish lemalam oisim makam is a little bit swollen, right above the erva. Kivan shemagdelas, when she grows, mismayich v'hoidach, it flattens out. So, in conclusion, an isha has 3 stages of development: a ktana, a nara, and a begeres. The chacham gave a mashal to a fig, semel, boichel, and the lowest madrega is a paga. A paga is merely a bud, that is still the yimei hakatnus, and she is absent of any simanim whatsoever, whether by the dadim and by the makam asara. She has nothing, she is merely a ktana. And that the next level is a nara, who has somewhat of simanim. She is partially grown, she has a little bit simanim lamala, and she has shtei sa'ares milamata. Both these, the nara and the ktana, are still within the rishus of her father, and he has entitlement to her mitzia, her ma'aseh yadayim, and her faras nedarim. The third and final madrega is a begeres, who is called a tsemel, a fully grown, who her dadim have fully come out, and as well as the kaf has flattened out. In this case, she's already out of his rishus. She's totally independent, and he has no entitlement neither for her Masi Yadayim, nor to be Meifin Adorim, or to get her Mitzvah. So now we have 6, 7 shitas regarding the description of Tzemel. So which one do we paskin like? Shol was Rebbe. They asked Rebbe, Halacha Kedivrei mi? Who do we paskin like? Who does the halacha follow? Shalach Lu, he responded, Kedivrei kulan lahachmer. We will follow all the shitas l'chumra, meaning as soon as she's reached one of these descriptions that we mentioned earlier, the 7 different types of descriptions, either one will be l'chumra, considered like a begeris, and the father will not be able to be mefer her nadarim any longer. Zokting right. Rav Papa, Rav China, Breder Avika. There was a machleket between Rav Papa and Rav China Breder Avika regarding the aforementioned exchange between Rebbe and his Talmidim, and the conclusion that we follow everything l'chumra. Chad Masniyaha, one of the Amoraim applied the halacha of Rebbe to the sugya of begeris, like we mentioned earlier. But Chad Masi, the other shita, held that the exchange between Rebbe and his Talmidim and the maskana that we follow all the shitas l'chumra was said regarding a totally different halacha. V'chad masnei achatzer tzuris, regarding a chatzer tzuris, a courtyard that is called a chatzer tzuris. Now, the halacha is that tevel is not chayv meiser until it is brought into the house. Ad sheyireh pnei habayis. There are many details to this halacha, but in general, the halacha is that it needs to be brought into a house. Taisus explains, this is midaraisa. Midarabanan, a chatzer will suffice. As long as it's brought into a courtyard, it will be chayav b'maiser. So what type of chatzer is mechayav b'maiser? It needs to be a properly guarded, a properly built chatzer, and that is considered a chatzer hatzuris, which will be mechayav b'maiser. The snan, ezer chatzer hatzuris shechayav b'maiser. What is considered a chatzer hatzuris, a proper chatzer which is mechayav b'maiser? So you have a machlekes. Reb Shimon Oimer, chatzer hatzuris? The kelim are safeguarded in this chatzar, meaning it is a well-protected courtyard that one doesn't hesitate to leave his chafetzim, his kelim, in this chatzar. My chatzar atzuris. Why do we call it such an interesting name, chatzar atzuris? Amar Rabbi Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shekem b'Tzur, in the city of Tzur, Moishivin shomer al Pesach chatzar. They used to place a shomer on the Pesach, at the Pesach of this chatzar, and therefore the chatzar was very well guarded. If one man goes and opens it, and the next person goes and closes it, apparently there's no proper supervision over the opening, the Pesach, the doorway of this chatzar. In that case, it is not considered a chatzar atzuris and would not be mechayev b'maiser. We need a properly guarded Pesach. If a person doesn't hesitate, he's not embarrassed to eat in this chatzar, meaning it is a self-contained area, and therefore it is a proper chatzar and is considered a chatzar to be mechayev b'maiser. Rabbi Yosi Omer, kol shenechnasim lo ve'ein oimrim lo imatum avakesh ptura. If a person just ventures in there and the residents don't come and challenge him, confront him and say, wait, what are you doing in our chatzar? If that doesn't happen, so it is not considered a properly guarded chatzar, and it is pater. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, nacha halacha, shtei chatzer zu lefnim zu. If you have 2 chatzers, 2 courtyards, one built within the other, the pnimis, the interior one, is properly protected, and it is chayeves. V'chitzoyna, but the outer one, however, is pater. So now we have many shitas. What is considered a chatzar? Does it depend on having a shomer? Does it depend on proper supervision on the Pesach, or feeling comfortable eating there, or being challenged by the residents? Halach k'divrei mi. We follow all the shitas l'chumra, meaning as soon as it has one of these conditions, it is a chatzar which is chayav v'maiser. Zok the Mishnah Vayter. We know that in order to be considered a gadol or a gdoila, we need shanim and simonim. In the case of a ben, he needs to be 13 years old, and in the case of a bas, 12 years old, and they need to have 2 sa'aros, 2 hairs of gadlus to be considered a gadol. However, if they grow in age but do not produce sa'aros, they are not considered gedolim. There's one exception to this, and that is a saris or islandness. It is a sort of a deficiency in their nature. In that case, they are not required to have sa'aros and are considered gedolim, even though they do not have 2 sa'aros present. Zok the Mishnah. Bas esrim shana shaloi heviya shtei saros. If she is 20 years old without any saros, tavi raya she bas esrim shana. She has to bring a proof. She has to prove her age. Vihi ailenis, and we assume that she is an ailenis, and therefore she is considered a gedola. But being that she's an ailenis cannot bear children, and therefore regarding the mitzvah of yibum, she is pater, she is possible from yibum. In order to be Makai mitzvah yibum, you need to be one that can bear children. The point of yibum is to be mamshich, the life of the mace, so to speak, perpetuate his legacy. And if somebody can't have any children, it doesn't really establish the name of the mace, and therefore the halachas of yibum don't apply to a nisha who is considered an ailenis and can't bear children. The same token by a man who is a saris who can't bear children, he is pasul from yibum. The same din will apply by an ish ben esrim shana if he's 20 years old without saris lahevi shtei saris. Yaviu rayishu ben esrim shana. They should bring a ray that he's 20 years old, who is saris, and he is a saris. He has a condition called a saris, and therefore he's not capable of growing saris. So therefore he is already considered to be a gadol without the requirement of shtei saris. He as well, since he is a saris and can't have any children, he is possible from all the halachas of yibum. So in conclusion, a ben or a bas, once they reach the age of 20 and they do not have saris, but they are considered a saris or ailenis, and therefore they are considered to be gedolim. Elu divrei Beis Hillel. V'shamei oimrim zeh v'zeh b'nei shmoyne esrei shana. Whether the ben or the bas, we are not required to wait until they're 20 years old, but rather as soon as they hit their age of 18, this halacha will apply. Rabbi Lezer Omer hazachar kedivrei Beis Hillel. By a zachar, we follow the halacha, the shear of Beis Hillel, which is 20. V'anakeva kedivrei Beis Shammai. By nekeva, it is 18. Why is that so? Sha'isha mamaheres lahavi ifnei ish. An isha matures earlier than a man. We know that she becomes bas mitzvah a year earlier, according to the shita of Rabbi, like mentioned earlier, and therefore regarding this halacha as well, we will confirm that she is an ailenis as soon as she reaches 18, which is 2 years prior to the 20 required by a zachar. Frag the Gemara, how can you say that as soon as they reach the age of 18 or 20, although they don't have sa'aris, they're considered to be gdolim? V'ramini, we've learned in the Brisa, echad li ben teisha shanim yomechad, the same halacha that applies by a 9-year-old, ve'echad li ben esrim shelo yehevi shtei saris, the same halacha will apply to a 20-year-old that does not have shtei saris, meaning in both cases he has a din of a katan. So how can you tell me that a 20-year-old has a din of a gadol? Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak Amar Rav, v'hu, you know what the Mishnah is speaking about? Shenol du boy siman isris. He has specific signs, simanim, that indicate that he's a saris. We're not speaking about merely reaching the age of 20. He's 20 years old, plus he already has simane isris that indicate that he has this condition, and therefore he's considered to be a gadol, because a person that is in this condition, a saris, is not capable of growing saris. Therefore, even in the absence of saris, he's already considered to be a gadol. Amarava dekanami, it is pretty obvious, is meduyik in the lashon of the Mishnah. Why? Because the Mishnah says diktani v'hu saris. The Mishnah says that a bas esrim shana or ben esrim shana shaloi hevish shtei saris, you prove that he's 20. V'hu saris. The Mishnah says a lashon v'hu saris, which is a rai, which means that we're speaking about that he has obvious signs of a saris condition, and therefore this case is different. In the case of the Bryce is speaking about he's merely 20 years old without any simanei sris. But if he also has simanim which prove that he's a sris, that confirms it to us, and he is not required to have 2 saris to be considered a gadol. Zok the Gemara, what if he will not develop the simanei sris? Until what point in his life is he considered to be a katan? Until what point? Until he reaches the age of 35, a majority of the 70 years of a person. At that point, he's certainly considered to be a gadol, even if he doesn't have shtei saris, and even if he's not a sris. He's already roish noisav. He's reached a point that you can't say that he's a katan anymore. So when those people brought a 20-year-old without saris to Reb Chia, they were looking for some type of eitzah. So he told them, if he looked shvach, if he looked weak, he looked lean, Amarlu Avaryo, have him gain some weight. Maybe that will bring these sa'aris. Ibari, if he looked a little bit too fat, Amarlu Akashur, weaken him, get him to lose some weight. And maybe perhaps that will bring about the simanim. So the Gemara, the Hani simanim, these simanim zimnin, sometimes the osumacha shishusa, sometimes when a person is lean, a person is weaker, so to speak, the simanim will come about. Zimna the asumachas b'yusa, sometimes the other way around. Sometimes by being healthy and big, that will bring about the simanim. Zakti Gemara, Amarav hilchasa b'kulei pirkin me'esleis. All the numbers, all the age numbers that we've had in this parak, the 3 years old and a day, the 9-year-old and a day, etc., etc. For all those halachas, we require me'esleis, meaning we look at his years. If he was born Tezayim B'Tammuz, a year later, Tezayim B'Tammuz, he's considered 1 year old. We don't look at the calendar year. V'ula Amar, Desnan Tanan, Deloitnan Loitnan. Meaning, only in those cases which the Mishnah specifically, explicitly is mefarish, that we're looking at his years. For instance, Bar Mitzvah is Ben Yud Gimel Shana V'Yayim Echad. That would indicate that we need 13 full years. So over there, we follow his years. But in the case of our Mishnah, for instance, the Mishnah simply says, Ba'as Esrim Shana, 20 years old. It doesn't say 20 years and a day. Or by the Ish, it says Ben Esrim Shana. It doesn't say he needs to be 20 years and a day. So that's a raya that we don't look at his years. We look at the years of the Olam, the calendar years. And we don't need 20 full years. As soon as he's entered his 20th, he's 19 plus, that is already considered as if he's a Ben Esrim Shana, and the halachas of the Mishnah will apply. So again, Rav says, and all the halachas, including our Mishnah of Sris and Eilinus, we require me'es leis, a full-fledged amount of years. In the case of our Mishnah, we need 20 years and a day. He needs to complete his years, his 20 years. Ula says no. Dafka, specifically in those cases where the Mishnah explicitly says, Yud Gimel Shana V'Yayim Echad, that means 13 full years. But in the case where the Mishnah, like in our case, where the Mishnah just says a Ben Esrim, so we can follow the calendar years, meaning as soon as he's entered his 20th year, somewhat, he's already considered as if he's a 20-year-old. Zakti Gemara, Bishleim Le'ula. It works well according to Ula. That's why some places the Mishnah says V'Yayim Echad, which means Me'es Leis. We look at his years, his personal years. And some places, like in this Mishnah, it doesn't say the word V'Yayim Echad. That's a raya that we calculate differently. Ela l'Rav, that they're all the same. Listen, why does the Mishnah differentiate? Over there it says V'Yayim Echad, and our Mishnah doesn't say V'Yayim Echad. That's one kash. V'Itanya, we've learned in a brisa, which seems to support the sheet of Ula, that we don't need a full 20 years, year to date. Rabbi Yossi and Kippur Eimer Shon B'Lezer, Shnas Esrim, the 20th year, meaning 19 plus, 30 days have already passed. He is already considered like she is 20 years old. Rabbi Paskin in a similar fashion in Lud, that Shnas Shmoyne Esrei, the 18th year, meaning 17 years old plus, 30 days have already passed, meaning he's already 17 plus 30 days. As already has the din of being an 18-year-old. So we see very clearly both shitas in the Brisa hold that we do not require a full amount of years. We don't look at the year to date, but rather once you've sort of entered that year, it has the chashivas of a year, that is already enough. Now, before we get into the discussion of Rav and Ula, let's just first explain this Brisa. We have two shitas here. One shita says within the 20th year, one shita says within the 18th year. How does that work? The one says that's pashut. It's not shver, it's not a kasha. They're both following the respective shitas of Bisham and Basila, whether the shear of a Saris and Eilinus is 18 or 20. Ela l'Rav kasha. But the bottom line is, they both agree that we don't need full years. So it seems to be a kasha to the Shita of Rav, who holds that when the Mishnah says 18 and 20, we meant 18 full years and 20 full years. So the Gemara Tanai Enachanami, you're right, it is a machlekes Tanaim, like we find in a different brisa, that there is a plukta between two Tanaim, whether the years of a Saris, the 18 or the 20, are full years or calendar years. The Sanya Shana Amura Bekachim. The brisa is going to bring a list of various halachas which are dependent on years. Shana Amura Bekachim, the year which is said by Karbanis. The Torah says you bring a keves, a lamb who's a year old. So regarding that shana, do we follow his shana, the year to date of the life of the keves, or do we look at the calendar years? Once he passes Rosh Hashanah, he's already a year old. So the Mishnah is going to say that regarding all these halachas, we look at the year of Me'es Leis, his personal years, year to date. We don't follow the calendar years. Shana Amura B'Kachim, Shana Amura B'Bata Rechaima, the year which is said in regard to the halacha of a bayis, a house within a walled city that was sold, that he only has up to 1 year to redeem, to be paid to that house. So the year that Torah mentions regarding that halacha, or Shtei Shanim Shevasada Achuzah, a person sells his Sada Achuzah, means a Sada that he was Yerush, and he sells it. So the halacha is that he can redeem, he can be paid it, but he needs to leave it by Lekeach for an amount of 2 years. Shei Shanim Sheved Ivri, we know that an Eved Ivri is Ovid, he serves for 6 years, the 7th year he is let free. So the 6 years that are said regarding an Eved Ivri, V'chein Sheveben Shevebas, the years that are said in the context of a Ben and a Bas, the Gemara soon will explore what this means. So all these halachas of Shanim, Kula Me'es Leis. Regarding all these halachas of Shanim, they are Me'es Leis, meaning that you need full years. We don't look at the calendar years, but rather at their perspective, at their years. So the Gemara, let's explain what these halachas are. Shana Amur B'Kachim Menolan. What do we find the Shana mentioned by Kachim? Or Rav Achbar Yaakov Amakra Keves Ben Shnasai. The Keves needs to be 1 year old, and we learn from here that Shnasai Shaloi V'Lei Shana Shal Minyan Olam. It says Shnasai, his year. So we follow his age, meaning we look at the year to date from when he was born. Shana Amur B'Bata Rechaima Menolan. How do we know that the Shana that is mentioned by Bata Rechaima is Me'es Leis? Amakra at time Shnas Mekari. He can be paid the bias until the end, until the completion of a year from when it was sold. We follow his year, meaning it was sold Aleph Nisan, it can be Nifta until the next Aleph Nisan. We don't look at the years of Leishnash Shaminin Olam, even though it passes Rosh Hashanah. We don't look at the year as a calendar year, but rather his personal year. Shtei Shanim Shebasad Achuzah Minolan. How do we know this halacha applies to the 2 years by Sad Achuzah as well? Amakra b'mispar shnei tvoi simkalach. You need to leave the sada by the lekeach, by the person who purchased it, for 2 years. Shnei means years. Tvuos, 4 crops. So the Gemara dashes why does the Torah use these lashonos? Shnei means years. The minimum of years, plural, is 2. The Torah adds tvuos, crops. It would seem to indicate that in addition to 2 years, you must leave it for him to have the benefit of many crops, even more than what would normally come from 2 years of growth. How is that? Sometimes it can happen that he will leave it by him. He will have the opportunity to eat 3 crops within 2 years. Now that is only if you look at the years, if you count the years according to the point of sale, according to the date of sale. Meaning, let's say he sold it to him a year before Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Elul. 2 years later, Aleph Elul, 2 years later, he can somehow squeeze in 3 crops. Because suppose at the time of sale there was a crop waiting to be harvested, then the next 2 years he plants and grows 2 more crops. So within 2 years, 2 actual years, he can harvest 3 crops. Now that's only if you follow his years. If you would view years as calendar years, so suppose in this case when he sold it to him on Aleph Elul, as soon as he reached Rosh Hashanah, 1 year has passed, and he only has 1 year to have the sada until before the man has a schus to be the moicher has a schus to redeem it, and it's impossible for him to harvest 3 tvuos, 3 crops in that short period of time. So it's pretty obvious that the 2 years mentioned regarding sada chuzah are 2 years me'es le'es, meaning their personal years and not calendar years. One more halacha. Actually, 2 more halachas. Shei shanim she'eved ivri minolan. How do we know that this halacha applies to eved ivri? Amakra shei shanim ya'aved b'shvius. He will be ovid, he will serve 6 years, ubashvius. The Gemara darshans, ubashvius nami yavid. Occasionally, it will come out that he will be ovid him, you have to serve even in the 7th year. Meaning, if you look at the calendar years, it's already the 7th year. But since we view the years as his years, and since we need 6 complete years, he will still be mechuyev, still obligated to serve his master until the completion of the full 6 years. So it's pretty obvious that we look at the years regarding the halacha of Eved Ivri, we look at the years of miyayim liyayim. His personally is dependent on exactly when he sold, and we look at the years year to date, and not calendar years. Now the Gemara is going to go into the last din of the Brisa of Sheben Shurabas, but that will be left for the next daf. So in conclusion, we have a halacha that a gadol and a gdoila is only when they reach the years of gadlus, 12 and 13. In addition to the shtei saris that they must possess, 2 saris that are a simon of gadlus. However, if there are no saris, they are considered tanim until roiv shnoisam, until they've reached the majority of their years, which is 35. There's one exception to this halacha, and that is the condition of a sris and islandess. If they have a condition of a sris and islandess which doesn't enable them to have saris, in that case they are considered gdolim, provided they prove they have simanim, they have an indication that they are indeed sris or islandess, and in that case we will consider them to be gdolim, even though they don't have saris. They're simply not capable of growing saris, so that's not required. Now, what is the age of a sris and islandess? At what point can we confirm that they are indeed a sris and islandess? We have 3 shittas. Either a ben and a bas are both 20, either they're both 18, or a ben at 20 and a bas at 18. Now, one final halacha: what is considered 18 and what is considered 20? Do we look at their years or do we look at the calendar years? Rav holds that we look at their years, me'es la'es, meaning you need a full 20 years and a day. And Ula holds, no, you need merely the shnas minyan olam, and as soon as they've reached into the 20th year, for instance, 19 plus 30 days, for instance, that would be considered to be a 20-year-old regarding the halacha of a sris and a islandess. And the Gemara's conclusion was that's actually a machlekes tanaim.